ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם שהכל נהיה בדברו. Today is Tuesday, January 28th, 2014. Yesterday was the International Holocaust Remembrance Day, designated so by the General Assembly of the United Nations. And yesterday was the last day of the life of Trudy Spira, a Holocaust survivor, an alumnus of Auschwitz. You can see her photo at the entrance of the Holocaust Washington Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. in the United States. She appears as a young girl in a large photograph at the entrance. She wrote a book, her autobiography, Return to Auschwitz. She wrote it in Spanish, Regreso a Auschwitz. There she tells her story of her childhood and young years that were shortened because of the Second World War, and she really never had an adolescence like most people have. The horrors of her personal story were recorded in that book, but she served as a witness for many, many years in Venezuela and outside of Venezuela, in hundreds of schools, universities, institutions in Europe and in Israel. She bore witness to what really happened during the Second World War. She was a charming woman, very intelligent, very well-read, and certainly knew how to express herself. Therefore, her demise on the same day that the United Nations declared as the International Holocaust Remembrance Day cannot be a coincidence. She claimed that she was really born again 69 years ago, because that was when she was liberated from Auschwitz. She had two birthdays, her biological birthday and when she was liberated from Auschwitz. But she bore witness. She was a call of conscience to many people who tried to deny what happened during the Second World War. I knew her personally, of course, for many years. We are very close friends, and I know numerous stories that maybe were not recorded in that book, but nevertheless, her family members certainly are aware of them. But I want to delve a little bit about what happened during the Second World War. How can one assimilate a number like 6 million Jews that were exterminated? A teacher in a school once asked their students, you know what? You have a week's time to collect 10,000 clips, paper clips, count them. It is such an enormous sum to count 10,000. Now imagine if you have to count 6 million. But these aren't paper clips. These were human beings. These were people with dreams, with loves. Everything went down the grave with them. It is not only them. What about the children they never engendered? What about the future generations? What about the scholars, the intellects that would have been born out of what was the cream of world Jewry in those years during the Second World War? It is very difficult to assimilate that. I know, for instance, that many people think that everybody was exterminated in crematoria, but that isn't so. There were others that were simply shot. Hundreds of thousands, maybe more than 1.5 million were simply shot, and this is how they died. I remember last year when we were in Yad Vashem, I spoke to Professor David Zilberklang, and he told us about it. And I have a witness. There was a gentleman in Caracas also, his name was Fenerick Bandel. He had very strange eyes, and I thought it was maybe a genetic fault of his. He had very intelligent children, so I knew that he was a man of high intellect, yet his look was very different. He looked at things very differently, until I heard his story. He was taken out, together with other people, out of the detention camp, and they were going to be shot. Suddenly, one of the Nazi guards didn't like what he said, and he gave him with his rifle an enormous hit on the head, left him unconscious, and fell into a grave that he and others had prepared beforehand. Afterwards, apparently, everybody was shot and piled on top of him. I don't know how many hours passed until he regained consciousness, and he was able to extricate himself out of that grave with all the dust and whatever other elements were in that grave. So that his eyes were not affected biologically. It wasn't a genetic fault. It was the way he saved himself from being killed, because he was hit with the butt of a rifle before he was actually shot. So that we have witnesses who can give testimony of what happened during those dark years of Jewish history. So the motto of never again for the Jewish people, a motto that in Israel is very important, and that is why they are so cautious about their integrity, their security, is because something so atrocious happened in our own days during the Second World War. How did the Nazis identify you as a Jew? Well, if you were from a Jewish home, Jewish mother, they said no. If one of your grandparents was Jewish, you are already contaminated with Jewish blood. You are a Jew and you had to be exterminated. Maybe that is why the law of return of the State of Israel, that gives the right of acquiring Israeli citizenship to any Jew, is if one of your grandparents was Jewish. The Nazis utilized that to sentence you to death. Israel gives you a new opportunity of life if one of your grandparents was Jewish. You know, we have a long history of persecution. We were exiled, thrown out from different countries during the centuries. Of course, notably among them, but not the only one, was 1492, when the Americas were being discovered, the two worlds were meeting. The Jews of Spain were expelled from Spain. But before expulsion, you had a choice. You could become Christian, you could change your faith, and you could remain. This is where we have the Marranos, or conversos as they are called. Their descendants. There's hardly anybody in Spain that does not have Jewish blood. They claim that Franco, the dictator of Spain, never wanted to apply the Nuremberg laws. He never wanted to go out against the Jews, really, because he felt that he had Jewish blood himself, because most Spaniards do. But the Nazis didn't give you any such option. You couldn't say, I want to be Aryan. I want to be one of you. No. If you had Jewish blood, you had to be exterminated. So the State of Israel has risen because the Chalutzim converted it into a Jewish state, but also because of what happened during the Second World War. There was an attempt to discriminate against Jews in Uganda, in a plane that landed there, and they separated the Jews from the non-Jews. Israel sent a commando group to rescue the Jews that were held there, and the one that led that commando group was Jonathan Netanyahu, brother of the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu. He was the only one that died in that expedition, and they were able to save all those Jews that were being discriminated because they were Jews. Because in Israel, the captain doesn't send his troops into combat. He says, follow me. He is the first one to go into combat, and unfortunately, he fell at that time. But I think that during the Second World War, not only the Nazis are the ones that should be pointed to. There were many collaborators. What about all the soldiers, many who are not Nazis? Daniel Goldhagen wrote a book, Hitler's Willing Executioners, how many people really collaborated with the Nazis. They themselves, Poles, Ukrainians, Croats, from different groups in Europe, collaborated with the Nazis. Had it not been for them, maybe Hitler would not have been able to do what he did. However, I think that this is a message not only for the Jewish community, it is a message for everybody, because hate may begin with Jews, may begin with gypsies, may begin with homosexuals, but it never stops there. It usually propagates, goes further. It's a cancer that eats up society. So that if anybody thinks that he is safe because none of his grandparents was Jewish, once there is hate, terrorism, it doesn't distinguish among races, among religions, among sects. Everybody, of course, falls victim to that. I would like to add a personal note, because Trudy was a personal friend. She was one of the homes that gave us warmth when we first arrived in Venezuela. When we came in 1967 on the holiday of Sukkot, she opened her home to us. She was fluent in many languages. She spoke English, Yiddish, Hungarian, Hebrew. She was a wonderful human being, very well read, and she had a very productive life. As I said, the Nazis never took away her dignity. She was a proud Jewess, and she participated in many of our institutions in Venezuela. Yad Vashem, without her, certainly is not the same in Venezuela. She participated in every event of Yad Vashem. She participated in the Unión Israelita and the Ashkenazi Kehila, in the Sephardi Kehila, the Asociación Israelita, and everybody is going to miss her. Not only the Jewish community in Venezuela, because she projected herself to the public at large. Nishmata tzerura b'tzoror hachayim. Her soul is certainly at peace as she ascends heavenward, and she unites with all those that preceded her in heaven above.